welcome to episode 4 of Food for Your Mind, where I eat the Wendy's Baconator and talk about H.P. Lovecraft. As I'm breaking into this, I want to say right off the bat that though I have the new annotated H.P. Lovecraft here, this is going to be more of a talk about Lovecraft generally. So if what you are looking for is a review of this particular book, this video probably isn't going to be very helpful for you. Obviously, I chose the Baconator for H.P. Lovecraft because I felt that this was going to be the most grotesque possible option. I can tell you after this first bite, I don't think that's true. This seems better than the triple already. The bacon's like, it's not really real bacon, but it is a pleasant contrast in terms of texture. It's nice and firm, is what I mean. Maybe even a little too hard. Usually with stuff like this, the very middle is kind of the danger zone. I may kind of leave that meat around the edge, as you see. So, again this week I wasn't able to quite finish. I'm not sure if that's cheating or not. You can tell me in the comments. I don't know if I'm pleased or not so pleased, but I can report that that was not the most grotesque of all possible Wendy's options. Triple was worse than that. This was still not that great, though. I'm going to give this a 4. I'm going to give the Baconator from Wendy's a 4. Let's move on to H.P. Lovecraft, shall we? This is going to be geared toward the person who knows nothing at all about H.P. Lovecraft. So if you're a big expert, again, this video may not be for you. H.P. Lovecraft was born on August 20th, 1890 in Providence, Rhode Island. Lovecraft grows up in that most interesting of class dynamics, the aristocratic family in decline. You see a lot of writers seem to come out of this social space. He's also a child prodigy who somewhat fails to live up to his early potential. He learns to read at a very young age. He learns how to read several languages, in fact, at a very young age. But he can't really do geometry, he can't really do algebra, and thus he can't go to Brown University as he'd always hoped to. In fact, not only does he fail to get into Brown, but he fails more or less to ever get a job for his entire life. He goes through life almost entirely penniless. There are a couple of interesting things about this. Remember, I told you he had this upper-class aristocratic background as a young man. And what I think H.P. Lovecraft's life shows us is that whether or not you are a gentleman doesn't necessarily have anything to do with whether or not you have any money. And that if you are a person like H.P. Lovecraft who believes himself to be a gentleman, then you will find a way to remain one, regardless of what happens to you. Even going a step beyond that, what H.P. Lovecraft's life also shows us is that you can be a penniless gentleman who basically never has sex with anyone, and still be one of the most influential people of the 20th century. I say almost never have sex with anyone. H.P. Lovecraft did marry a woman, a Jewish woman, in fact, named Sonia Green. They were married for a few years, and she claimed that they had sex, but it's not quite clear whether that's true. This brings me to what I hope will be a recurring feature of Food for Your Mind, which is incel-spiration. If you are having difficulty with the opposite sex, in literature and in the real lives of writers, you sometimes find instances of human beings who did manage to have sex, apparently, despite the odds. Do you know why Sonia Green decided to marry H.P. Lovecraft? She read his writing. And so I say to you, brave incels of the 21st century, develop a talent. You know, before you go to the gym, before you try to make more money, develop some kind of ability. Some women at least kind of like that. Even a few men like it. Both of his parents are ultimately committed to insane asylums where they die. So that's a very appropriate family history for a horror writer. Then Lovecraft himself ultimately dies of cancer of the intestine, which seems a very grotesquely appropriate way for him to die as well. So yeah, it's a good deal all the way around. Now, I guess the time has come when I should tell you my own personal Lovecraft story. You may not believe this, but I actually used to be a fairly normal person. Not in terms of what I looked like or what my life was like, but in terms of my media consumption. You know, I didn't really read books or anything like most people. I just watched TV and went to the same dumb movies everybody else was going to. But even back then, even before I really became a reader, something about H.P. Lovecraft really, really appealed to me. And appealed to me in spite of a lot of things. Number one is racism. H.P. Lovecraft is fairly racist, and not just in that way that, like, basically every white guy from 100 years ago would be kind of considered racist today, but in a way that is highly integral to his writing. And you really do get the sense that the writing wouldn't be the same without the racism and this fear of otherness and corruption. I also like H.P. Lovecraft in spite of the writing and his using the same words over and over again. My two favorites, I decided, were gibbous. That's when the moon is between half full and all the way full. And there's also cyclopean, which means here not one-eyed but made out of gigantic stones. So those are two good words to use in your own writing. Lovecraft's two big influences that he names are Poe, Edgar Allan Poe, and Lord Dunsany, who's also a pretty interesting writer in his own right, so check him out as well. Third, I enjoy H.P. Lovecraft in spite of the fact that basically the same thing happens in every story. Specifically, you have a protagonist who is aristocratic or a scholar. He is always white, he is always childless, he is always unmarried, and he always becomes involved in some sort of occult or necromantic or outerworldly doings that ultimately prove to be his undoing. There is no sex in H.P. Lovecraft, and there are basically no women. I looked it up online, and I think the whole Lovecraft corpus, I think there are like 3 female characters who actually have names and lines. And in the end, whenever the monster pops out, it is always termed indescribable. That is the word he always uses, and you're left kind of thinking, could you maybe try? You know, I did read this whole story, but it doesn't matter somehow. I guess one of the reasons why H.P. Lovecraft is so popular is that there are a fair number of people who like reading, but don't like reading about human relationships. Another big reason I think people like Lovecraft so much is that the sex and the romance, which is absent from the story, is kind of infused throughout the landscape, and I'll read some quotes where that figures very prominently later. Before I move on with my Lovecraft-related argument, I want to hit you with 2 quotes that struck me as particularly Lovecraftian. These are not quotes by Lovecraft, but they are still Lovecraftian quotes, and you'll see what I mean when I read them. First is by Salvador Dali. He said, "In the subconscious, you fuck ugly people because the libido always desires something repulsive." And the second one here is by Charles Dickens, and he said, "There are 2 people in my head, one who wants what's best and one who wants the opposite." Let me ask you this. Have you ever met a person who went on and on and on describing a person or a thing that they found repulsive? Say maybe it might be a person. They might always be talking about how gross it would be to have sex with them or something like that. Well, at a certain point, you have to ask yourself, hey, why are you even bringing this up? If it's so gross, why are you even talking about it? The answer is, of course, that it's not that gross to that person. They are mentally trying on the possibility of actually doing some such thing with some such individual. Here's a quote to illustrate the point I made about the landscape becoming sexualized and the sexuality somehow bubbling up even no matter how hard he tries to stuff it down into his subconscious. Let's read it, shall we? "There was thunder in the air on the night I went to the deserted mansion atop Tempest Mountain to find the lurking fear. I was not alone, for foolhardiness was not then mixed with that love of the grotesque and the terrible which has made my career a series of quests for strange horrors in literature and in life. With me were 2 faithful and muscular men, from whom I had sent when the time came. Men long associated with me in my ghastly explorations because of their peculiar fitness." Obviously, you don't have to be Sigmund Freud to feel the homoeroticism in this passage. Only a few paragraphs later, he goes on. "The ancient lightning-scarred trees seemed unnaturally large and twisted, and the other vegetation unnaturally thick and feverish, with curious mounds and hummocks in the weedy, fulgurite pit earth reminded me of snakes, and dead men's skulls swelled to gigantic proportions." Just how thick is this vegetation, you know? It can be too thick. You don't want to be too thick. Regarding my earlier point about every time someone says they don't like someone or something, just ask yourself, why are you even talking about it? This passage kind of illustrates this. I call it the everyone is lying about everything all the time theory. This is a passage from He, in which the narrator is shown what is supposed to be a kind of hellish vision of the future. And as he snarled the phrase under his breath, he gestured anew, bringing to the sky a flash more blinding than either which had come before. For the full 3 seconds I could glimpse that pandemoniac sight, and in those seconds I saw a vista which will ever afterward torment me in my dreams. I saw the heavens verminous with strange flying things, and beneath them a hellish black city of giant stone terraces, with impious pyramids flung savagely to the moon, and devil lights burning from unnumbered windows, and swarming loathsomely on aerial galleries. I saw the yellow, squint-eyed people of that city, horribly robed in orange and red, and dancing insanely to the pounding of fevered kettle drums, the clatter of obscene crotala, and the maniacal moaning of mute horns, whose ceaseless dirges rose and fell undulantly like the waves of an unhallowed ocean of bitumen. If you didn't know what a crotala was, that is not unlike the castanet, or the version of the castanet that appeared in ancient Greece, and bitumen is asphalt. Now, again, at first glance, it seems pretty bad with all, the verminous things flying around and the black pyramids raised to the moon. Ask yourself this, there are people there, including some women. I mean, if they're reproducing, so that's not all that bad. Second of all, there is music. And when I read Lovecraft now, this is how I read him. I give him this kind of backwards reading. If you learn how to play that crotala well enough, some of those ladies hanging out at the Black Pyramid, they may look at you and say, hey, he knows what he's doing with that crotala. Maybe he knows what he's doing with something else. Maybe it could wind up being a pretty good day for you at the Black Pyramid, and a better night at the Black Pyramid, if you know what I'm saying. H.P. Lovecraft is a very interesting writer, well worth a read. As I mentioned above, it's kind of a semi-literature in a way. It has some parts of literature, but it doesn't have all the parts. When I'm reading Lovecraft, it's like I'm looking at a really beautiful woman who's paralyzed on one side, if that makes any sense. It's beautiful, but all of it just doesn't quite function. That being said, I've read everything that Lovecraft has written. I've read a bunch of the letters, in fact. And he's a writer I'll probably stick with for a while. So I'm going to give him a 7. 7 out of 10 for H.P. Lovecraft.